student from the University of Oregon, studying abroad here at Waseda for a year, and today I want to talk about education. So recently, I've been really interested about what education actually means. What do we call education? Now, when you think about education, how many of you think about school? Because for me, the ideas of school and education are not directly connected, and I'm going to explain why. But first, I have a little story for you. So I was born in 1993 in Washington State in the US, and I had a fairly normal childhood. However, when I was 5 years old, my parents made a radical decision. After doing a lot of research on the school system, they came to think that I would learn more outside of school. And they therefore decided that they were not going to send me to school. So as simply as that, I didn't go to school. Now legally, this is possible. In the US, you can declare yourself to be a homeschooler. And that usually means that basically your parents act as your teachers and you have school at home. So my parents registered us as homeschoolers, but they decided to do things a little bit differently. They decided that they were not going to make me learn anything. They would be there for me whenever I wanted to learn something. They would find the resources for me and support me, but they would never force me to learn anything. There would be no classes, no homework, no tests, no curriculum. Now this sounds like a crazy idea, I know, and whenever I tell people about this, their first reaction is always, but how did you learn? The answer is, I learned by living. So this is a picture of me when I was 5, which is when they made the decision not to send me to school. And I'm going to give you a general outline of what my life was like, so you can have an idea of what I was doing instead of going to school. So when I was 5, I learned how to read. And this is a big deal because I loved reading. My little brother was 3 at the time, and he learned how to read too. He actually taught himself how to read by looking at the cereal boxes on the breakfast table. So together, we loved reading, and this was a big part of our lives. On top of reading, I loved math and science. My mom would write practice math questions for me, and I would do pages of them. I loved writing, and I would take pens and papers to bed with me and write stories when I was supposed to be sleeping. We raised tadpoles to frogs and charted their growth. We drew our bodies on giant pieces of paper and colored in all the internal organs. I learned all the wild fruits and berries outside, and I knew what was safe to eat. This was never a class. This was just my life. My life was my education, and I learned by living. So it continued, and as I grew, my interests changed, and I was always learning different things. When I was 8, I started my own dog walking business. When I was 9, I started cooking for my whole family. When I was 11, I was in dance classes. When I was 14, I joined a team that built and programmed robots. When I was 15, I was obsessed with microbiology. And when I was 16, I decided that I wanted to go to college. Of course, I wasn't in high school, and I had never been to school before, but I wanted to go to college, so I decided to make it happen. In the US, there's a special test called the GED, and if you pass, it basically means the same thing as graduating from high school. So I decided to take the test. I got a practice book, I studied for a couple months, and then I took the test and passed. And then I started college at the University of Oregon at 16 years old. So this was my first experience in the school system, and there were a lot of things that surprised me. In the beginning, I was so excited. I had signed up for all these different classes in different subjects that I was really interested in. But I had trouble finding other people who shared this feeling of excitement about going to school. As a general first impression of school, this is what I found. Apathy. The overall level of apathy was appalling. I started encountering teachers who seemed like they didn't really care about teaching, and then masses and masses of students who seemed like they didn't care about learning. It was as if everyone was there because they had to be there, not because they wanted to be there. The teachers were there because it was their job, not because they wanted to impart knowledge. And the students were there because they needed a degree, not because they wanted to learn. Of course, this is a generalization, and not everyone is like this. But seeing groups of people who are like this, I started to think, something is seriously wrong here. If this system, if uninspired teachers and sleeping students constitute what we call education, I think we are severely limiting ourselves. I started considering the complete school system, and I began to understand the apathy. If you think about when we first send kids to elementary school, around age 5 or 6, this is where all the problems begin. Kids are forced to learn. They don't get to choose what they're interested in. It's all just forced on them. It doesn't matter what they're interested in. They're just forced to go through a system, like going through a factory line. Stop reading, it's time for math class. No more math, you have to do science. Science is over, it's time for history. It doesn't matter if they love science and are in the middle of a project they want to finish. Students are just shuffled from one class to the next, from one subject to the next, in a giant system that takes away freedom. In doing so, it's no wonder that people end up apathetic about learning. And this is extremely unfortunate. Consider how curious and inquisitive young children are. Babies are born with a natural curiosity about the world, and toddlers ask hundreds of questions every day. They want to learn everything. But being forced to do something will take away any of the passion you ever had, and that's what we see happening in the school system. Furthermore, after being shuffled through the system, there's the grades and the tests. This is my second point. Getting good grades and passing tests is not the same as learning. The idea of grading is baffling to me. Students perform to pass a test or perform to get a good grade, but that's not learning. Passing tests is a matter of memorization and cramming information into your head. It's all a game. Think of all the tests you have taken in your life, all the information you had at the time of the test, and how much you actually remember now. In the end, the only person who can measure how much you have learned is yourself. Just the idea that someone else, a teacher or a test, can measure how much you know is ridiculous. But we believe this. And even worse, we assign ideas of intelligence based on test scores. But I want to ask, does this look like learning? Does this look like an education? Because this, to me, looks like a game of memorization that may or may not benefit you in the long run. This is playing a game and receiving a score. That's it. So I entered college, and this was the environment I found myself in. It seemed as if the system was in a catastrophic cycle. Students studying what they had to study, and then memorizing it to perform well on tests. Now, I'm not saying that all schools are terrible. That's not what I want to imply. I've had fantastic teachers, and I've taken some classes that have really benefited me. There's tons of kids who love going to school and have great experiences. But considering the whole picture, I think it's time that we start to recognize the flaws in our system. We need to start thinking about education in new ways. School can be a resource for learning, but it should not be seen as the one and only path to being educated. If the definition of education is a broken school system, then I think we are doing a great disservice to many people. For example, let's take a look at this person. This is Albert Einstein, who, by the way, did terribly in school. His grades were so bad that his teachers actually told his parents they thought he had a mental disability. But while he was receiving terrible grades, outside of school, he was pursuing what he wanted to learn. His success was because all the time he was failing tests in school, he was studying physics by himself. The school system limited Einstein. He succeeded because he was learning outside of it. So let's go back to the beginning and think, what is education? Considering the cycles of apathetic students and teachers who go through the grades and the tests, to call this an education is awfully limiting. It's insulting even. Education could be so much more than this. I think it's time that we start reconsidering things. What do we want? Do we want knowledge, or do we want test scores? Because personally, I vote for knowledge. To be educated should mean that you have learned something valuable, not that you have received a high score or graduated from the best school. To me, education is finding the things that you want to learn and going out and learning them. Rather than a class of sleeping students, this is what I imagine. Find the things you want to learn and run, chase after them. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not intelligent. Do not let any test score dictate what you are capable of. We need to rediscover our curiosity and embrace it. The world is a huge and fantastic place. There's unlimited opportunities to learn, and they are not restricted to school. So let's imagine what education could be. Let's imagine how much we could learn. Let's imagine creating a system that supports students as they learn, instead of pushing them into downward spirals. At the very least, let's start turning the kaleidoscope and allowing ourselves to think of education in new ways. Rather than calling school an education, let's think of learning itself. The act of education is the act of learning, not the act of going through the school system. So children should be pursued to go after the things that they're interested in. In fact, we should all be going after the things we're interested in. Find what you love and pursue it. Einstein found physics and pursued it. Let's look beyond the test scores and work towards a system that gives students a love for learning. And in each of our own lives, let's start by finding the things we want to learn and going after them. I would like to close with one of my favorite quotes by Eartha Kitt. She says, "I am learning all the time. The tombstone will be my diploma." These words mean a lot to me, as I want to continue learning for the rest of my life, and I hope that all of you can continue with this spirit as well. Thank you very much.